Not every goodbye is loud. Not every broken heart ends with anger. Some of the most powerful endings happen in complete silence. The person who once answered every message, forgave every mistake, defended every flaw, and stood beside someone through every difficult moment suddenly becomes impossible to reach. No dramatic speech, no final argument, no desperate attempt to be understood. Just silence. That silence often confuses people more than any emotional outburst ever could, because they spent so much time believing that kindness had no limits. Many people assume that those with deep empathy will always stay, always forgive, and always put others before themselves. They mistake patience for weakness and compassion for endless tolerance. But that belief hides a truth that many only discover after it is too late. Even the kindest heart has a limit. Every broken promise, every ignored feeling, every moment of disrespect leaves a mark. Most of those marks remain invisible because deeply empathetic people often choose peace over conflict. They listen instead of arguing. They understand instead of judging. They carry emotional weight without asking anyone to notice. From the outside, everything appears normal. On the inside, the pressure quietly grows. Then one day, without warning to everyone else, the person who seemed impossible to lose quietly lets go. What makes this moment so shocking is that it rarely begins on the day they walk away. It usually begins months or even years before anyone realizes it. By the time others notice the distance, the emotional decision has often already been made. This is why so many people describe losing an empath as one of the biggest regrets of their lives. They do not lose someone because of one mistake. They lose someone because of a long pattern they never believed would have consequences. In this video, you will discover why highly empathetic people often stay far longer than they should, why they notice far more than they ever admit, and why their silence can become more powerful than any argument. You will learn the hidden emotional process that slowly transforms endless patience into firm boundaries, the surprising reason many people fail to recognize the warning signs before it is too late, and the psychological patterns that explain why those who constantly give support eventually choose to protect themselves instead. We will also uncover several lesser-known truths about emotional exhaustion, why repeated disappointment changes the way trust is built, and why genuine kindness should never be mistaken for unlimited endurance. Most importantly, you will understand that the greatest consequence is not revenge, anger, or punishment. It is the quiet loss of someone who once cared deeply enough to keep trying when almost anyone else would have already left. Stay with us until the very end because the final lesson may completely change the way you see empathy, relationships, respect, and emotional strength. It may also help you recognize signs that most people overlook until the damage cannot be undone. Whether you see yourself as an empath or simply want stronger and healthier relationships, every part of this journey builds toward one powerful truth that deserves your full attention. Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy thoughtful videos that explore human behavior, psychology, emotional intelligence, and the hidden patterns behind everyday relationships, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our future videos. Now let's begin. One of the biggest reasons deeply empathetic people remain in unhealthy relationships longer than most is not because they are weak. It is because they see people differently. While others quickly judge actions, they often search for the pain behind those actions. If someone becomes cold, they wonder what happened to them. If someone becomes angry, they try to understand what struggle may be causing it. If someone breaks a promise, they convince themselves that stress, fear, or difficult circumstances are responsible. This ability to understand another person's emotions is a beautiful quality, but when it is not balanced with healthy boundaries, it can slowly become a heavy burden. Instead of asking whether they are being treated well, they keep asking whether the other person is hurting. Their attention shifts away from protecting themselves and toward helping someone else. That is why they continue giving chances long after many people would have walked away. Every apology sounds sincere because they want to believe people can grow. Every promise feels like the beginning of real change because hope is stronger than doubt. They believe that everyone deserves another opportunity to become a better version of themselves. There is nothing wrong with believing in growth. The problem begins when hope replaces reality. They start carrying responsibilities that were never theirs to carry. They feel responsible for someone else's happiness, healing, and emotional stability. They begin believing that if they love harder, support more, remain patient a little longer, or sacrifice one more piece of themselves, everything will eventually become better. Over time, they stop asking whether the relationship is healthy and start asking what else they can do to fix it. Love slowly turns into responsibility. Compassion slowly becomes obligation. Their own emotional needs quietly move to the bottom of the list. They avoid conflict because peace matters deeply to them. They dislike hurting others, even when those people have already hurt them many times. Instead of expressing disappointment, they remain silent. Instead of creating distance, they forgive once again. Instead of demanding respect, they lower their expectations. From the outside, it appears as though nothing is wrong. People begin believing this kindness has no limit. They assume this patient person will always stay, always understand, always return after every disappointment. That belief becomes one of the greatest mistakes anyone can make, because endless patience does not mean endless endurance. While all of this is happening, another process quietly unfolds beneath the surface. Highly empathetic people notice far more than they choose to reveal. They pay attention to details that many others overlook without even trying. They notice when someone's smile no longer reaches their eyes. They notice when words and actions no longer match. They notice when appreciation slowly disappears and entitlement quietly takes its place. They notice when conversations become one-sided, when effort becomes uneven, and when respect begins to fade in small but meaningful ways. Many people believe these changes go unnoticed simply because the empath does not immediately react. In reality, silence is often mistaken for blindness. It is not that they fail to see what is happening. They simply spend a long time deciding what those changes truly mean. They watch patterns instead of isolated moments. Everyone has a bad day. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone says something they regret. Empathetic people understand this better than anyone. That is why they rarely judge someone based on one incident. They observe what happens over weeks, months, and sometimes even years. They begin connecting small moments that seem unrelated to everyone else. A forgotten promise here, a careless comment there, less appreciation, more criticism, less honesty, more excuses. Begin forming a larger picture. Emotional inconsistency becomes impossible to ignore. One day they are deeply valued. The next day they are treated as though their efforts mean nothing. Affection appears only when it is convenient. Respect becomes conditional. Gratitude slowly disappears. Even hidden resentment becomes visible through little changes in tone, body language, and daily behavior. Most people never realize how much an empath notices, because they rarely announce these observations. They keep them inside, they continue listening, they continue hoping, they continue giving. This quiet observation often creates the false impression that everything is fine. Meanwhile, an invisible record is being written inside their mind. Every disappointment adds another page to that record. No single event seems large enough to destroy the relationship. One broken promise may be forgiven. One lie may receive another chance. One moment of disrespect may be explained away. One forgotten effort may not seem important. But emotional trust is rarely damaged by only one event. It is shaped by repetition. Every repeated disappointment leaves another small crack. At first, those cracks are almost impossible to notice. Daily life continues as normal. Smiles still appear. Conversations still happen. Support is still offered. Yet the feeling of emotional safety quietly becomes weaker. The relationship begins changing from the inside long before anyone sees changes on the outside. This slow accumulation is what makes the final outcome so confusing for those who never paid attention. They remember only the last disagreement. They blame one conversation. They point to one difficult day. They cannot understand why such a small moment ended everything. What they fail to recognize is that the final moment was never the real cause. It was simply the last drop added to a container that had already been filling for a very long time. Every ignored feeling, every repeated disappointment, every moment of emotional neglect slowly reduced the trust that once seemed impossible to break. By the time the final incident arrived, the decision had already been forming deep inside. Nothing dramatic needed to happen anymore, because the emotional weight had already become too heavy to carry. Then the turning point quietly arrives. It rarely announces itself with shouting or anger. There is no dramatic confrontation meant to prove a point. There is no desire for revenge. There is no endless argument demanding fairness. The greatest change happens where no one else can see it. Deep inside, the hope that once kept them holding on begins to disappear. They stop believing that another conversation will change everything. They stop believing that another sacrifice will finally earn respect. They stop believing that love alone can repair behavior that another person refuses to change. This shift is almost invisible at first. They become calmer instead of louder. They ask fewer questions. They explain themselves less often. They stop chasing people who repeatedly choose distance. They stop forcing conversations that always leave them unheard. They stop expecting effort from someone who has consistently refused to give it. The emotional energy that once fueled endless patience quietly fades away. Others often mistake this calmness for acceptance, but it is something very different. It is emotional release. The constant struggle finally ends because they are no longer trying to save a relationship that only one person has been carrying. Their silence becomes heavier than any argument because it no longer asks for change. It simply accepts reality and begins letting go, one quiet step at a time. The moment an empathetic person finally creates distance, many people react with complete disbelief. They ask what changed. They wonder why someone who was always kind has suddenly become quiet. They assume the empath has become cold, selfish, or uncaring. The truth is usually far less dramatic and far more meaningful. The shock does not come from the empath changing overnight. It comes from people suddenly noticing everything the empath had been giving all along. For a long time, that person offered attention without being asked. They remembered the small details that everyone else forgot. They checked in after difficult days. They noticed when someone was struggling even before a single word was spoken. They listened with patience while others interrupted. They gave emotional support without expecting praise. They forgave mistakes that would have ended many other relationships. They remained calm during difficult moments and often became the emotional stability that held everything together. Because these acts happened so naturally and so consistently, they slowly became invisible. Human beings often stop noticing what is always there. Kindness becomes expected instead of appreciated. Patience becomes normal instead of valuable. Loyalty becomes assumed instead of respected. The empath continues giving because caring feels natural, while everyone around them slowly begins believing that this level of care will never disappear. That assumption creates a dangerous illusion. People stop protecting what they believe they can never lose. When that constant source of emotional support finally steps away, the silence feels much heavier than anyone expected. The morning message no longer arrives. The comforting conversation never happens. The understanding response disappears. The person who always made time suddenly protects their own time instead. The one who always listened now remains silent. The one who always forgave no longer offers another chance. At first, many people think this distance is temporary. They expect the empath to return because that has always happened before. Days pass, weeks pass. The familiar warmth does not come back. Only then does the real value of everything they receive become clear. It is similar to noticing the importance of light only after darkness fills the room. The emotional support that once seemed ordinary suddenly feels impossible to replace. This is why the distance feels so brutal. It is not because the empath became cruel. It is because people finally experience life without the quiet strength that had been supporting them for so long. The absence becomes louder than the presence ever seemed. Every conversation feels different. Every challenge feels heavier. Every difficult moment reminds them of the person who once stood beside them without asking for recognition. They begin remembering countless moments they overlooked while focusing only on what they wanted next. Regret often arrives after appreciation should have been given. Many people make another mistake during this stage. They convince themselves that the empath suddenly changed. They say things like, "You are not the same person anymore," or "You used to care." Those words reveal how little they understood the journey that led to this moment. The change did not happen in one day. It did not happen after one disagreement or one disappointment. It started much earlier, sometimes months earlier, sometimes years earlier. Every ignored feeling quietly changed something inside. Every broken promise reduced a little more trust. Every repeated act of disrespect slowly weakened emotional safety. Every conversation that ended with dismissal, instead of understanding, added another layer of emotional exhaustion. None of these moments looked dramatic enough to end the relationship by themselves, which is why most people never noticed them. They only paid attention when the empath finally stopped giving. That final moment became the center of attention because it was visible. Everything that happened before remained invisible because no one was looking closely enough. This misunderstanding causes many people to believe they are victims of a sudden decision when they are actually facing the result of a very long process. The empath was communicating all along through smaller signals. They became quieter. They shared less. They smiled less often. They stopped expressing excitement. They asked for understanding in gentle ways. They hoped someone would notice the growing emotional distance before it became permanent. Those signals were often ignored because they were subtle. The louder demands of everyday life received attention, while the quieter emotional needs were pushed aside. Eventually, the empath stopped sending signals altogether because repeating the same message without being heard became too painful. One of the least understood truths about deeply empathetic people is that they usually leave emotionally before they leave physically. Their heart begins protecting itself long before their actions reveal it. They still fulfill responsibilities. They still remain polite. They still avoid unnecessary conflict. From the outside, almost nothing appears different. Inside, however, an important shift has already taken place. Expectations slowly disappear. Hope becomes smaller. Emotional investment decreases little by little. This is why the final goodbye often feels calm rather than dramatic. There is no emotional energy left to fight. The battle has already happened inside their own mind. They have spent countless nights questioning themselves, searching for answers, making excuses for others, and hoping tomorrow would finally be different. By the time they decide to step away, that inner conversation has already reached its conclusion. Others are just hearing the final sentence of a discussion that has been taking place silently for a very long time. After establishing healthy boundaries, another transformation quietly begins. The emotional energy that was once spent trying to fix everyone else slowly returns. Many empathetic people do not realize how exhausted they have become until they finally stop carrying problems that never belonged to them. Their mind becomes calmer, because it is no longer constantly searching for ways to prevent conflict or repair damaged relationships. They wake up without immediately worrying about someone else's mood. They no longer feel responsible for keeping everyone happy. Their thoughts become clearer because they are no longer trapped inside endless emotional confusion. Instead of asking why another person refuses to change, they begin asking what kind of life they truly want for themselves. This simple shift changes everything. Their confidence grows because every healthy boundary reminds them that their needs matter too. Self-respect slowly replaces self-neglect. Decisions become easier because guilt no longer controls every choice. They discover that protecting their own peace does not make them selfish. It simply makes them emotionally healthier. The kindness they once gave away without limits begins including themselves as well. For the first time in a long time, compassion flows in two directions instead of only one. As emotional clarity returns, many parts of life begin improving naturally. Friendships become more balanced because effort is shared instead of carried by one person. Conversations become more honest because fear of disappointing everyone slowly fades. Relationships built on mutual respect become easier to recognize, while relationships built only on convenience become impossible to ignore. The empath no longer feels attracted to people who only take without giving anything in return. They become more comfortable saying no without explaining themselves for hours. They understand that every yes given to someone else should not require saying no to their own well-being. This does not mean they stop caring. Their compassion remains one of their greatest strengths. The difference is that wisdom now guides that compassion. They learn that helping others should never require destroying themselves. They realize that support is healthiest when it flows both ways. They begin choosing people who celebrate their happiness instead of simply expecting their sacrifices. Life becomes quieter, but it also becomes lighter. Peace replaces constant emotional tension. Stability replaces uncertainty. The need to rescue everyone slowly disappears, because they finally understand that lasting change must come from the other person, not from endless sacrifice. For those left behind, the greatest consequence is rarely punishment. The greatest consequence is recognizing too late what they once had. They remember the patient listener after conversations become empty. They miss the person who always encouraged them when life becomes difficult. They realize how much emotional security existed simply because someone genuinely cared. This realization often arrives only after the empath has stopped trying to return everything to the way it was. By then, the loss is no longer about one relationship. It becomes a lesson about appreciation. Kindness should never be treated as an unlimited resource. Respect should never depend on how much someone is willing to tolerate. Genuine care deserves to be noticed while it is still being freely given. Waiting until someone reaches emotional exhaustion is one of the most common mistakes people make in relationships of every kind. There is also an important lesson for anyone watching this, regardless of whether they see themselves as highly empathetic or not. Every healthy relationship depends on mutual effort. No one should become the permanent caretaker, while the other becomes the permanent receiver. Appreciation should be expressed regularly instead of assumed. Small acts of gratitude often prevent much larger problems from developing later. Honest communication should happen before disappointment turns into silent resentment. Difficult conversations may feel uncomfortable, but avoiding them usually creates even greater pain over time. Healthy boundaries should be respected instead of challenged. When someone says they are hurt, the goal should not be to prove them wrong. The goal should be to understand why they feel that way. Listening with humility often saves relationships that pride quietly destroys. Patience should never be confused with weakness, because the strongest people are often those who remain calm the longest. Yet even the calmest person has limits. Every relationship becomes stronger when both people protect each other's emotional well-being, instead of expecting one person to carry all the weight. The healthiest connections are not built through endless sacrifice by one side. They grow through shared respect, shared responsibility, honest communication, consistent appreciation, and the daily choice to value the person beside you before silence replaces every word that was never spoken. As we reach the end of this journey, one truth stands above everything else. An empath does not become powerful because they stop loving people. They become powerful because they finally stop losing themselves in the process of loving everyone else. Their greatest strength has never been endless sacrifice. It has always been their ability to care deeply. But true compassion is incomplete if it never includes the person giving it. There comes a moment when protecting your own peace is no longer selfish. It becomes necessary. Setting boundaries is not an act of revenge. Walking away from constant disrespect is not an act of cruelty. Choosing your own emotional well-being is not weakness. It is one of the bravest decisions a person can make. Many people spend years believing that kindness means accepting everything, forgiving everything, and carrying everyone else's burdens. Yet real emotional strength comes from knowing where kindness ends and self-respect begins. That is the lesson so many people learn too late. By the time they realize the value of the person who was always there, that person has already found the courage to choose peace over pain. Perhaps the greatest consequence is not that the empath leaves. It is that their absence reveals everything their presence quietly provided. The encouragement that once made difficult days easier. The patience that held relationships together. The forgiveness that gave people more chances than they deserved. The quiet support that asked for almost nothing in return. Those gifts often become visible only after they are gone. That is why appreciation should never be delayed until someone reaches their breaking point. The strongest relationships are built when kindness is valued while it is still being given, not after it has disappeared. Now, take a moment to reflect on everything we've discussed today. Has there ever been a time when protecting your peace became more important than saving a relationship? Or have you ever realized too late the value of someone who quietly gave their heart without asking for recognition? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who is facing the same struggle. If you found this video meaningful and enjoyed exploring the deeper side of human behavior and emotional intelligence, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. Your support helps us create more thoughtful videos that inspire, inform, and encourage people around the world. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.